everyone. Welcome to Pop Crime TV's The Outlier podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin. I have a very special guest that I will be introducing in just a minute. But today, we're going to be diving into one of Hollywood's most chilling mysteries, the untimely death of Brittany Murphy, one of my favorite actresses, and Simon Monjack, her husband, who died 6 months after Brittany of the same thing: pneumonia and anemia. Now, it's been 15 years. Brittany Murphy passed away on December 20th, 2009. And listen, we all want to know, was it really that simple? Pneumonia and anemia. Fans and conspiracy theorists, they have questioned everything from toxic mold to foul play. I'm hearing these ridiculous notions that Diddy was somehow involved. And listen, I don't even entertain those. But joining me to untangle this web of speculation is one of the nation's leading forensic experts. He is the chief medical examiner of Tarrant County, Texas. This is Dr. Kendall Crowns. Dr. Crowns and I, we do Nancy Grace together, and I've just been mesmerized by everything that he has to say. And I'm always like, wow, I didn't know that. Wow, I don't get that. So I begged him to come on with me, and here he is. So let's get to it, Dr. Crowns. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Of course. I love the skeletons behind you as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, no. And honestly, it's always helpful to when you do these type of demonstrations and everything. But I sent you both Brittany and Simon's autopsy report, and just right off the bat, before we get into it, I mean, what are your thoughts of them both dying of pneumonia? I don't know why I put that in quotes. It's a habit. Pneumonia 6 months apart.
So, I mean, anytime you have two individuals dying of similar things in a short time frame, it's always very interesting. So we often will see people die of things like carbon monoxide in the same house. And when we get two deaths in the same location, it starts making you think that there's something going on. Is it just that, the fact that they were both unhealthy, or is there just something more underlying their deaths?
Right. And I think, I had interviewed probably 4 years ago, because I've been working on this case for a long time. And I interviewed Dr. Cyril Wecht. He was hired by Brittany Murphy's late father to look into everything because he made a comment. Oh, maybe she was poisoned. And look, I know how it is. Families who are desperate, they will hire someone to say what they want to hear. I'm not saying he did that, but I'm saying it could be possible, because when I interviewed him, he was like, no, it wasn't poison. Who could get in to her house every day to give her this mixture of XYZ? It could be hair dye, whatever. But something that he said that was interesting, he's like, let's say conclusively the autopsy reports are correct. I mean, this is treatable. Pneumonia, she could have gone to the doctor, gotten something over the counter, and so could he. I mean, do you see the same thing here?
Well, right. They both died from pneumonia. The problem is pneumonia is a little more complex. When you have a cold and you get the stuffiness and the wheezing and all that, you can get treated with antibiotics or the stuff they give you for viral conditions and possibly change it. But if the pneumonia gets really bad, it is something you have to go to the hospital to get fluids and get treated. And then you can get what's called sepsis, where the bacteria gets into your bloodstream and goes everywhere. So both of them potentially did not get treated in a timely fashion, and then they both die. And when you look at their autopsy reports, they both have, as you pointed out, anemia, but more specifically, they have hypochromic microcytic anemia, which means their red blood cells are small and misshapen and they're pale. So it's often associated with iron deficiency. And why do they have iron deficiency? It's because they are sick all the time. So they're just not processing things, nutrients right, and all that. And Brittany also had other conditions that would compound on this. So really, they probably needed to go to the hospital and get treated. I don't know if they were just hanging out at home dying from pneumonia.
I mean, what you said seems to make sense. I did interview one of her friends who said towards the end they spent a lot of time at home. She told me they loved the bathroom. She said that when they had friends over, these two would kind of hang out in the bathroom to have private time. Now, when I did read the autopsy and look, this it's probably nothing, but they make note of the environment, right? They did say on Brittany's autopsy, they said the house was pretty clean. So it wasn't like they were living in filth and disarray, but there was possibly mold spores. Uh, so were they marinating in these mold spores is kind of a question I had, and could this have affected them? And then the other part is, well, her mother, who was much older in her 60s, was living there as well. Why didn't she have pneumonia and anemia? And why didn't she, inhale these same mold spores and get ill?
So, I mean, those are really good questions, especially when you're thinking it's an environmental issue causing both of these people to get sick and die. Why is the third person in the house not dying? So that makes you wonder. I mean, that can put it in the question of poisoning, right? Is mother-in-law doing something that kills the both of them for whatever reason? But the other thing in an environmental situation is in a house, you can have a room that could have something that's making everybody sick, but the one person who doesn't live in that particular portion of the house isn't getting sick. So it can be, you can have people getting ill because they're in a room that has something that the other person isn't getting ill because they're not in that same location. So there's a number of things that could happen. Mold spores is always a good question. Mold would be, of
Yeah.
course, our good friend fungus. Fungus is always a entertaining thing. The thing is, an autopsy with fungus is you'll find the fungus. You'll see it in the body because the fungus will take hold and start growing in the tissues itself. And Brittany is a diabetic, and diabetics are actually more susceptible to fungal infections. Specifically, one of them is called aspergillus. And aspergillus is a really invasive fungus that can grow into your blood vessels and then kind of go throughout your body and can basically eat you alive.
Oh,
Uh, she
wow.
doesn't have that one. So one thing about aspergillus is it's in the soil, it's in pepper, it's kind of everywhere. So most of us who have normal immune systems aren't affected by it, but diabetics can be affected by it. But looking at her autopsy report, if she had had an aspergillus infection, you would have seen it. Because I've seen aspergillus in individuals where it ate their face off.
Oh, wow. Okay. I mean, look, mold though was found in the house. Like that is factual. And something that Simon Monjack's mother told me personally 4 years ago is that Brittany, Simon, and Sharon Murphy, her mother, they were all terrified of something or someone. But then, Dr. Crowns, I read that if you do inhale this mold for a prolonged period of time, it can make you paranoid. Is there any truth to that?
So, depending on the type of mold, usually house mold is this type of mold that's called black mold or Stachybotrys autra. I don't have any recollection of that one causing hallucinations, but
Mm,
if you've ever heard the Salem witch trials, which I'm sure you have,
I
there's
have.
one theory that the hallucinations were caused by a bread mold, rhizopus that was on the wheat that they were making their bread from. So yes, there is theories that fungal infections can make you hallucinate. So it's a
Wow.
possibility. Can it cause respiratory problems? It can, but again, if it took hold in her body, you would find the mold in her body at the time of autopsy. You would see areas where the mold has kind of taken hold in the tissue and started growing.
Okay, that makes sense. And as far as Brittany's diabetes, you mentioned she was a diabetic. I don't think this is necessarily out there for the public because diabetes is serious. If you don't take care of yourself as a diabetic, you do risk a lot here. And I mean, did it I don't recall looking, I guess, this deep into the autopsy report, but did she have insulin in her system at the time of death?
So insulin we can't really test for at the time of death because it breaks down so quickly it kind of disappears. But what the
Mm,
thing is you look at her glucose level, and see if it's at a high level. And then you also look for another thing called acetone, which is created when they are in a high glucose state. They get what's called ketoacidosis, and they
Mm.
produce acetone, which we can find in by doing toxicologic testing. Her glucose level was actually low, so she wasn't in a diabetic crisis at that moment. She was hypoglycemic, not hyperglycemic. But and again, when you die, the bacteria in your body eat the glucose away, so your glucose level will actually artificially drop after death.
Do you think her diabetes had anything to do with her death? Because she was not regularly seeing a doctor. I do know that much from her friends and her mother-in-law. They did not go to the doctor. I
So
mean,
I'm
Simon had, well, I'll get to Simon had some prescription pills that he had under different names, but Brittany, as far as I know from these sources, didn't go to the doctor.
So, like you said earlier, diabetes is a very serious condition, and a lot of diabetics don't take care of themselves because, depending on the type of diabetes you have, you can kind of control it with diet and all that. But if you're constantly having high blood sugar levels, it does damage your body. It can cause damage to your heart, can cause damage to your organs, and of course, can make you susceptible to bacterial infections or fungal infections, or just it knocks out your immunity. So the fact that she's a poorly controlled diabetic makes her more susceptible to getting a bacterial illness or a pneumonia, which results in pneumonia. So I mean, it all fits that she's not taking care of herself. She's more susceptible. She gets a pneumonia and she dies.
Right. And as far as Simon goes, Simon was bigger. It was noted he was obese. He was said to have drank a lot, and he was on prescription pills, and he had a lot of different prescription medication. I guess my question is again, how does this produce the same cause of death? They each have different medical issues. You've got pneumonia and anemia, but different medical backgrounds.
Right. I mean, the one thing about Simon is I think he's morbidly obese. I didn't calculate
Yeah.
his BMI, but
Mm,
morbid obesity makes you, again, it's a physical condition that creates a situation where you're more susceptible, you're not as healthy, you are more
right.
susceptible to getting bacterial illnesses. But again, the funny thing to me is the hyperchromic microcytic anemia is very
Mm,
specific to both of them. Can be from chronic disease, which they both had, but one of the things it can be from is lead poisoning. So, and nobody really looks at them for lead poisoning. They didn't test for it or anything like that. So, you got to wonder: are they in an old house? Are they in Hollywood? I can't remember where they live,
yeah,
but
it was Hollywood, and Britney Spears allegedly lived in this house and was like, I don't like this house. It creeps me out. And she sold it.
so, and another thing that lead can cause is hallucinations because it affects your brain. So, maybe if Britney Spears lived there too, maybe that's why Britney decompensated all those years ago because of lead poisoning.
Wait,
But
yeah, this is something.
it's
Wow.
it's it's interesting. So to me, it's interesting they both have this similar hematologic finding or blood finding that can be associated with lead. And lead can also make you very ill and make you susceptible to getting diseases. So it's something to think about that's really not thought of often. But if it's an
Mhm.
old house with lead paint, I mean, I doubt Brittany Murphy and her husband were peeling the paint off and eating it. But it's
Who knows
just
at this point, but
it's just kind of one of those things you got to think about is those conditions can be there, and if they aren't tested, they get easily missed.
right, right. And I want to play something for you to get your opinion on this in just a minute. But TikTok and the internet, they go down these rabbit holes, and my husband always shows me, and I'm like, dude, this is such crap. But he saw this girl who I believe she was probably doing it for, the shock factor, but I didn't have a chance to look into it. She said, well, there's a chemical that can mimic pneumonia for coroners and when they're performing autopsies. Is this true? Is there a chemical that you can give someone like a poison to mimic your cause of death being pneumonia?
So I wouldn't know what that would be. That's interesting to hear. I'd have to do some research on that. But the thing about pneumonia is pneumonia causes a reaction in your tissues, which causes an inflammatory reaction that fills so in your lungs has these little air sacs called alveoli,
Mhm.
sorry, and the alveoli fill up with inflammatory cells called neutrophils, and the
Okay.
neutrophils are what it tries to get rid of the disease. So you'll see that on at autopsy when you do the histology. At autopsy, when you look at the organ, they'll be full of pus. So is there a chemical that can mimic that? I don't think so. There's chemicals like paraquat, things like that, that can cause lung damage and cause your lungs
Mhm.
to shut down, but it isn't going to cause that inflammatory reaction with a bacterial finding because she's got a bacteria
Yeah.
on blood culture as well. So I don't think there's a chemical that would make it look like a bacterial pneumonia that medical examiners would miss. Is there
Mm.
chemicals that can cause respiratory damage? Of course there are, but it wouldn't look like a pneumonia.
And how difficult would it be for someone to get their hands on a chemical like that if they're not in the medical field? I mean, look, there's been Sean Combs, Puffy, Diddy, his baby mama, and his ex-wife Kim Porter died of pneumonia. And look, I know he has a lot of different resources, and he pretty much is a very, very powerful man. But how difficult would it be for someone like him to get his hands on these chemicals, or someone like a Simon Monjack, or whatever? They have resources, they have people.
Well, I think it would be highly difficult to get a hold of chemicals that can cause that type of respiratory damage. They're usually industrial chemicals. They're usually like industrial insecticides, things of that nature. And then the thing
Mm,
is to administer that chemical, you'd have to know what you were doing, and you would run the risk of killing yourself. And when you refer to these associates of Mr. Combs, everybody's using drugs, and long-term drug abuse also affects your body and makes you susceptible to getting illnesses and dying, sadly, of pneumonia. I know it's not as sexy, but it is the
no.
reality of chronic drug use.
Yeah, no, I want this. I want to debunk this stuff because I'm sick of seeing these, like, oh, well then, because look, you mentioned, I want to know, just go back really quick before I move on. You said you could kill yourself by administering this chemical. Why? Just by touching it?
Well, right. I mean, you get it on your skin, it absorbs in your skin, and it can kill you. You inhale it, it can kill you. It's just those type of industrial chemicals that cause that severe lung damage. You don't want to mess with unless you know what you're doing.
Right. Okay. So just going forward a bit, there is a coroner in LA. He has since passed away, and they called him the Hollywood coroner. His name was Ed Winters. So he performed the autopsies for Brittany, Simon, Kim Porter, Sean Combs's ex, and that's where a lot of this conspiracy, I believe, came from. Is more about, well, what did this guy know? And then when he died, he was said to die of, quote, natural causes, which, I mean, so it does kind of give you that whole, ooh. So I can see where people would sort of, spark a discussion about this. But that also brings me to, coroners in general. I mean, you perform a lot of autopsies. How do you feel like your body is personally, let's say you have a really busy day, you are performing your first autopsy. And I don't know if you guys have a limit or like a cutoff, but it's like, what if you have to do 6 autopsies in one day? I would assume that, your energy level, your brain, nothing is as sharp, as it is when you do your first one to your sixth one, but I could be wrong. And everyone's different. I know that.
So I don't feel you are wrong. So the National Association of Medical Examiners name has standards for the practice of doing autopsies by medical examiners, and they prefer that we do only 250 autopsies in a year. And that way you are not cutting corners, you're not overworked, you're not stressed out. At the office that I run, the maximum that the doctors are allowed to do in one day is 4. Because I agree with you, at some point you're not as sharp, you're tired, you're hungry, you're thirsty, and you're just not thinking about things because you're in PPE all day. And so after 4 cases, they're not supposed to do anything past that. And the thing is if it's a complicated case, that's the only case they're going to do that day. So it is, you don't want to do too many cases in one day because you're not going to be thinking as much. You're going to be tired. You're going to get them confused or mixed up. So there are
Yeah.
standards and there are limits that we do. And then, saying that people dying of natural causes, I don't know what Dr. Winter died of, but I mean, if you're going to say that natural death is a conspiracy, I mean, it's a pretty grand conspiracy. I think we should start looking at Ronald McDonald for killing us all.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think it's all just a coincidence, but that was really interesting and really helpful because I always wondered about that. 4 autopsies. I mean, and that seems like a lot for one day. Have you ever had to do 4 in a day?
Yes, I did 4 yesterday.
And it was grueling, I'm sure.
It just depends on the type of case. Again, I mean, if you're dealing with an 18-year-old drug overdose, their findings aren't all that difficult. But if you're dealing with a 600-pound person with multiple medical problems, it can take quite a while. It can be tiring.
Yeah, I can imagine. My gosh. Well, just going back to Simon and Brittany, I'm going to play something for you. And, she was not your patient. This is obviously your expert opinion. But you just got dark, by the way. I'm like,
Yeah,
did I say something? Or?
No, it's my lights in my office. I have to move backwards to turn them back
do
on.
like the wave.
Yeah. Did you want me to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, do the wave. Do the wave. I like you brighter. So, and I'll set this up. Well, perfect. Amazing.
Yeah, it's the sensor in my office turns off if I don't move. So.
Oh yeah, no, all good. You're saving energy. Well, all right, I'm going to play this for you. These are just 2 very short clips back to back of Brittany Murphy. One clip is of her on Ellen and she's talking to Ellen and this is the Brittany Murphy that I remember. She's bright, she's bubbly. This was around 2005 or 2006, I believe. And the second clip is of Brittany Murphy doing her last interview about 3 weeks before she died. She did not have any illegal drugs in her system. You would agree with me, per the autopsy. Correct. She had no prescription to any type of like opioid or anything like that. Now, we all know that it doesn't mean that you don't take them, right? I mean, Simon had a plethora of prescription drugs. And in my mind, this is pure speculation. I have no proof, but I do believe that it is a combination of possibly him giving her these types of downers or something to kind of keep her to himself. He was said to be a very, very just aggressive guy. He was aggressive towards Brittany. He was only wanted Brittany for himself. He was that type of guy. He followed her to her movie sets. He made a fuss. And people were kind of saying at the end, we don't want to work with Brittany Murphy because of this guy. It's really bad. So when she died, they had said no. And her friend even told me she was sober when I knew her. She did not do any types of drugs. Well, watch these clips and let me know exactly what you think. Like I said, they're very short, but I believe they're very, very telling.
It's a cool movie.
That's why it's number 1.
I would love, well, that doesn't necessarily make a movie number 1, but you know what? That's why it should be number 1 this weekend again. So please come out and see
You should. You should go see it again.
Yeah.
No.
Say the least.
How was it filming such a dark thriller?
I was very drawn to this because of its noir quality and the short film that was made before we were able to make the full-length feature. I was excited to be a part of.
Yeah.
So I mean, in those clips, she appears to lose weight. She doesn't appear to be as focused. But the problem is a diabetic that's not taking care of themselves is going to have issues along those lines too. But then you have drug abuse can cause that as well. There's a number of factors that can be in play there. But again, with her underlying medical condition, if she's not taking care of herself, she is going to deteriorate.
Yeah. I mean, didn't it look like sorry to say, but she reminded me a little bit of Patsy Ramsey when she was doing interviews, after JonBenet died. They just seemed so heavily medicated and slow, and it disturbed me to my core to see that difference in her.
Yeah, again, it could be drug use, and it could be, the fact that she's not taking care of herself. Because once again, when diabetics get hyperglycemic, they can get slurring of speech and confusion and things of that nature. So diabetes is not something to play around with, and she should have just taken better care of herself.
Yeah, and that was something that Dr. Cyril Wecht said. He said, look, I don't know if Simon Monjack and Sharon Murphy are necessarily directly responsible for her death, but they are responsible for not encouraging her to take care of herself, not taking her to the doctor when she needed to go to the doctor. But why didn't he note in the autopsy report that diabetes could play such a huge role in her death?
I mean, they focused on the fact that she had pneumonia, that she had the anemia and the iron deficiency. So they're looking at the cause of death. I mean, I can't remember it. They list diabetes in here somewhere, but I don't think they put it as a contributing factor. It's something that you could have put on part 2 of the death certificate as diabetes mellitus being a contributing factor. But I think what they were focusing on is the acute causes, not the long-term implications.
And then as far as Simon goes, he most likely had pneumonia from not taking care of himself and living in that house, which, by the way, at the time of his death, I don't know if you noticed this, but the house seemed to be more cluttered. They had noted it seemed to be more, once Brittany had died, these two seemed to just lose it and were living in their own filth, which didn't help.
Well, and you have to look at it as depression too. As he's depressed, he lost his wife, he's not taking care of himself, he's letting the house go. I mean, that to me, when I read it, it could be drug use, and it could also be depression from the loss of his wife. He also had head trauma as well with the fall from the ladder. So he had a lot of problems on his own. So
yeah. And part of me might think that this Ed Winters, this Hollywood coroner, could he have, and again, speculation, could he have noted the exact same causes on purpose without really highlighting the others for people to talk because someone told him, you know what, this would be really interesting in the media. And I don't put anything past anyone anymore. Okay. Could he have done it this way on purpose? Did somebody pay him money speculating to do something like this? I mean, especially if he's like in his head, okay, I have all the facts there. Let me just rearrange them a little bit.
Well, I mean, anything can be done, right? So I didn't know Dr. Winters personally, and I would think that he was just diagnosing and basing it on the findings he had from autopsy. They were very similar. When you look at the reports, they read very similar as well, except he's overweight, she's a diabetic. But he had the findings he had. The one thing I think is you've got two people from the same house with the same problem. It could be environmental. They may have wanted to look more into what was going on in the house just to make sure there wasn't something, like I had said earlier, lead somehow getting into their food or their water and causing them to die, or it's something that they were eating combined, that they both were eating that they got poisoned from. Who knows? But nobody went into that further. But they were both people with chronic illnesses that died from pneumonia, which is an often final event for people with chronic illnesses. But could he have been paid off to say something? You never know. I mean, I would hope not, but if someone offered me a ton of money, I would not compromise myself at this point in my life. But you never know. Money is the root of all evil, right?
No, it is. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but just in conclusion, I just want to quickly go back to the lead. I mean, I've been saying, oh, it's a conspiracy that they could have been poisoned, but you're saying they didn't look into this factor that could have been lead poisoning. And remind me why you thought that could have been a possibility, and how else lead could have gotten into their system without someone purposely putting it there.
So the main thing is hypochromic microcytic anemia, which is the anemia they're describing. can be associated with lead poisoning. So it's something that it's one of those things you can add to the differential or the list of causes of it. And the fact that they both died from it, it's kind of interesting. So that makes you think, could someone have been poisoning them with lead? Yes, hard to do, but yes, they could have been doing that. But is it something in the house, in the paint, in the pipes that the water's coming through? Is it some sort of herbal medicine that they've purchased that they're consuming? Is it some sort of weird other stuff that someone has told them that this treatment will cure your diabetes, if you eat this? Who knows? There's a number of ways you could get lead in your system other than someone intentionally putting it in your body or putting it in your food. But it's one of those things to think about when you see that type of anemia and two people having it. So it makes you wonder, is it something in the house that they're getting exposed to? And then with you adding on the fact that Britney Spears lived there. And it was at around the time that Britney had all her problems. It could be something in the house that was toxic to her as well.
Right. I'm just getting the date when Britney lived in that house. It said Britney Spears lived in the Hollywood home with Justin Timberlake until they broke up in 2002. And then in 2003, Murphy bought the home from Britney Spears for $3.85 million. And then she lived there for almost 6 years. Ooh, that's so interesting. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Well, you heard it here, guys. Dr. Kendall Crowns, I'm so thankful to have you. You are fascinating and by far one of the smartest people that I've ever known. So I really appreciate you coming on with me.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, good. And I hope you'll join me some other time. And I didn't scare you off about all of this conspiracy stuff.
Oh, no. It's just part of the job.
Yep, exactly. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching and for listening. I will see you soon. Because of that 9-dash line. And Ted Cruz said, look, if you're not into geopolitics, you won't notice this. I mean, hello.